Welcome back. My name is Jermaine, and this is part 5 in a series of videos on Psalm 23. Like always, we will make this simple. We will take this passage of scripture one verse at a time, and we'll see what we can learn about the God we love. Are you ready? We're in Psalm 23 and verse 5, which reads, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup runs over." Whenever God leads, there is always room for a banquet, a pause in the journey, a moment of celebration. The Pharisees didn't understand this, and so they complained against Jesus, saying, "This man receives sinners and eats with them," in Luke 15, which is in the New Testament of the Bible. Their complaint was that Jesus assumed the position of host for the worst kind of guests. They could not comprehend why Jesus, the Good Shepherd, would set the table for sinners and publicans. They thought that people who made mistakes and had failures had no need to associate themselves with Jesus. Jesus responded with the parable of the shepherd traveling over vast fields into dark crevices in search of that one sheep. And then he says, "And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying to them, 'Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep which was lost,'" in Luke 15 and verse 6. The one who did the rescue, or had a deep concern for the lost, invited others to join in the festivities. This is a great depiction of Jesus because no one can set a table like him. He's an extravagant host who sets the table for sinners and eats with them. My wife and I were looking for a place to stay for our vacation, and we found out that there are people referred to as super hosts on Airbnb. According to Airbnb, superhosts are experienced hosts who provide a shining example for other hosts to follow, while at the same time providing an extraordinary experience for their guests. Made me think, what if Christians were like that? What if we were shining examples and also provided an extraordinary experience for our guests? Jesus is a divine host, and Jesus goes out of his way to invite people to participate. He first rescues us and brings us to his house for fellowship, and he never stops giving to the sheep. And every time he gives his best to the undeserving. He gives everything, including himself. When David says, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies," he is talking about the tablelands where the shepherd would bring the sheep to feed in the summertime. The sheep would have traveled through the dark valley of the shadow of death in this redemption story, but would enter this place on the high hills to feed, the restoration. Now, the shepherd would put himself in danger to get the table prepared. He would painstakingly work on his knees to remove all the poisonous weeds that could harm the sheep. He would ward off the many enemies and mark their locations in order to protect the sheep, even if it means death to himself. Did you realize how much Jesus did to prepare the table for us? He came to this place and died on a hill in order that you and I might have fellowship in the same house, to sit at the same table. Christ's death does not mean that all of our enemies are taken care of. There's a time in the future for that, even more. But for now, we still have enemies to deal with. We should be aware of our enemies, but our shepherd should be our focus. We should acknowledge where our enemies are, but without an ounce of fear, we should eat at the table with our shepherd. Jesus had said that our enemies are not always those on the outside. He says that a man's enemies will be those of his own household in Matthew 10 and verse 36. Paul would take this up further, and he would say in the book of Acts, "Savage wolves will come in among you, not sparing the flock," speaking of the church in Acts 20 and verse 29. The Pharisees took the enemy's seat when they chose to despise the people brought to the table, and they were in the same gathering. I think too often we forget that Jesus was the one who opens the door of the church and set the table for us. We tend to look too much at the enemies inside or outside, and we say, "I'm not going to be in church," or "I'm not going to stay in church because this person did this to me," or "this person said this to me." Wait. Did they invite you? Jesus was the one who set the table for you. You and I, who are hungry and thirsting for spiritual nourishment, cannot afford to be outside. When Jesus sets the table in church and invites you in, don't let anyone tell you can't come. Do not let any of your enemies block your access to the shepherd. He has done all of this for you. Even if your enemies are from your own household, sit at the table and dine with Jesus. Don't let anyone interrupt your spiritual connection with him. All that matters now is the shepherd, and yet there is hope for the enemies. For this same shepherd who died for one, died for all. He sets the table for you so that your enemies will see and desire access to something better than what they have. I love this verse in the book of Proverbs, Proverbs 16 and verse 7, which says, when a man's ways please the Lord, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with him. You know the best way to get rid of enemies is to please the Lord, to enjoy what he provides at the table. Don't get up and walk away. Seek to please the Lord in all that you do. After all, there's no one who is greater at hosting than Jesus. And there's no greater place where the table is set than the church. So, my prayer for you is that you may not leave the high hills, the tablelands that God has set up for the nourishment of the sheep.